Last episode, we really got into the details of the three main parenting approaches that are out there. And while being aware of these is super helpful from a big picture standpoint, they're so basic and vague that it can be hard to see how these really apply to you and your unique situation. One of my absolute favorite parts of my parent coaching program was when we learned about the four basic parenting styles. Not to be confused with approaches. Yes, I know that can seem confusing, but stay with me. Within authoritative parenting approach, based on your experiences and values as a parent, we can narrow in even more on how you show up as a parent, your strengths, areas that can be challenging, and things you're going to say, and also stages of development that you might enjoy more. So, we're going to spend our time today talking about these four styles. While there is a full inventory to determine your main parenting style, I did break this down to a 9-question quiz that is free on my website. So if you're curious to find out what your main style is, I would encourage you to head over to ashleyOparentcoach.com/parenting-styles-quiz. I can also link this in the show notes. After you complete these questions, you will receive a PDF that outlines your main style. As I mentioned, this information was so helpful to me because, well, one, I just love assessments that pertain to learning more about myself or others, like Strengths Finders, Myers-Briggs, Enneagram. You get the point. And while these are so helpful for general information, they aren't geared toward a huge role that we all are currently playing, which is parents, right? They're more geared toward us, how we show up in work or life in general, but not that parent-child relationship. So now that we've narrowed down to focus on an authoritative approach, how can we enhance this with our unique style? Let's jump into these four styles, sharing briefly the values, traits, strengths, and challenges of each. Again, this is just a bit of the information, but I found it to be incredibly helpful for myself as well as when I'm coaching parents. These four styles, just so you have the backstory, they're not things that I made up or my parent coaching program made up, but rather they are based on Carl Jung, who you might be familiar with his work through Myers-Briggs. So we all have these certain preferences based on our experiences, genetics, and environment that help form how we show up as a parent. By understanding our main style, we can focus on our strengths and then really start to enhance those challenging areas and gain clarity on how we can make the most of motherhood. So while we may tend to have a mix of these four styles, we typically have one or two more dominant styles that play out each day. And as I've mentioned, I love learning about these because as I found during my program, I loved figuring out more myself and what are the challenges I can experience. But also I saw that my husband is a very different style than I am, which I kind of already knew. I'm the emotional one and he is the numbers guy, right? So this allowed me to really appreciate and lean on his strengths more and find that balance between the two of us. So the four styles are, and I'll tell you the standard name and then the name that I kind of shifted it to make it a little bit more interesting. So these four styles are personal guidance or intuitive mom, practicality and results, organized mom, reason and expectation, thinking mom, and care and nurturance, the nurturing mom. Based on the names, you may have an idea of which one resonates with you, but let's go through each one. So that intuitive mom, if this is something that you're thinking, I like this might be me, then you really value independence, creativity, self-discovery, and intuition. Your strengths are that you foster individuality, encourage exploration, and you trust the child's instincts. Some challenges with this style are that you might struggle with structure and discipline and can sometimes be a little overly permissive. Things that you're most likely to say to kids are things like experience is the best teacher or listen to your inner voice. Next, we have that practicality and results. So the values here would be things like structure, discipline, and achievement. Strengths would be you provide stability, set clear expectations, and encourage hard work. Challenges, you might be a little overly controlling or rigid and can sometimes neglect those emotional needs. Things you're most likely to say to your kids are things like, it's important to plan ahead. Your commitment is what's important. Then we have that care and nurturance, the nurturing mom, right? Your values are emotional connection, empathy, and nurturing relationships. Strengths here are fosters strong emotional bonds, provides unconditional love, and creates a warm and supportive environment. Challenges, though, we might be a little overly protective or indulgent on the flip side, and we can sometimes struggle with setting boundaries. Things that you're most likely to say to your kids here are, how are you feeling? You're very special to me. And then we have the thinking mom, that reason and expectation. So values are intellectual development, critical thinking, high standards. Strengths here would be encourages intellectual growth, promotes problem-solving skills, and sets high expectations. Your challenges can be that you may be perceived as demanding or not so sympathetic and can sometimes forget a little bit about those emotional needs of our kids. Things most likely to say to your kids are, what do you think? Or let's stop and consider the consequences. That was a very brief summary of all 4 styles, but I think you can probably see yourself in at least one of those styles. And as I've said, I have coached parents with all of these different parenting styles, and it really does make a difference for how I support them, whether it's through my questioning or strategies that I suggest. For example, one of my clients earlier on, she was an intuitive mom through and through. She loved creativity and she had science experiments. I mean, she homeschooled. She just had all of this love of learning and again, creativity in her home. But what was starting to become a struggle is that she had kids who needed a lot of structure and was seeing a lot of big behavior as a result of that. And she also had a spouse who was starting to get a little frustrated with some of that messiness that was kind of being created and all these experiments being taken over in the home. So we had to work together to really think about how can we embrace her creativity, that hands-on learning, that go with the flow mentality, and also bring in some of that structure, not to feel so rigid, but so again, she can be a little bit more balanced for her kids and for her whole family. Then I've also had a client who was a thinking mom. And this was interesting because I really structured my questions to really get those gears moving as we talk. But also, this mom had a toddler. And as we saw with thinking moms, a challenge can be, you love that reason, you love the logic, and toddlers are very far from logical. And so even just understanding that that is your style and that you're looking and searching for your kids' behavior to make so much sense when they're 2 and 3, even that was just a relief because it's like, oh yeah, I'm expecting something that is not developmentally appropriate. How can I start to shift my expectations? So the last thing I want to share today about these styles is that based on your style, there are typically stages of development that you will enjoy more with your child, which I just think is so cool to learn. Not that you're going to be like dreading a stage or anything like that, but I just kind of nerd out on all of this information because it's so cool to think. I think we've all heard certain moms who are like, I love the baby phase. I love newborns. And then there are other moms who are like, oh my gosh, no, thank you. When I would tell people I worked with middle school, they would be like, how on earth can you do that? I can never do middle school, right? So we all have these different preferences and a lot of it's based on our style. So I'm going to rapid fire these. And I'd love to hear what you think. So, nurturing mom. So you love that infancy and early childhood, but can often struggle with the middle childhood or early adolescence time with setting boundaries, being a little overindulgent, and really starting to struggle with your child starting to push away and craving that independence. Thinking mom, you are a little bit of the opposite, and you can thrive during the middle childhood and early adolescent phase because you enjoy being able to use more of that logic and reasonable consequences and problem-solving approach versus that infant and early childhood. You might feel a little confused because, again, you're trying to use reason, which usually doesn't work at this phase. Organized mom, you tend to excel during the early adolescence, guiding them realistically but also firmly. Sometimes can be too strict, but handle struggles well. Might struggle with that infancy, early childhood because you're wanting and craving for those routines and it feels a little chaotic and confusing, but then enjoys that middle childhood phase where you can begin to follow a school and activity schedule. And again, it starts to be, even developmentally, a little bit more predictability in terms of emotions and schedules, and really start to love the questions coming from kids. Intuitive mom, you really do actually love each stage, but find struggles within each one. So, for example, with that early childhood and infancy, you might be torn between your child and those creative outlets. During later years, middle childhood, and early adolescence, you enjoy watching your kids grow, but might encourage too much independence or crave your own outlet for that creative expression. So, is this interesting to you? Can you see yourself in this? Can you see yourself, if you've had an infant, if you have a child who's in that early childhood or even that middle childhood, can you see how this style can impact your experience as a mom? Do you want to learn more? Make sure to take that quiz that I referenced. I'm going to link it in the show notes. And I would love if you would reach out, make a comment, message me directly. Let's keep this conversation going, because I am just so fascinated by parenting styles, and I could probably spend several more episodes on this, but this is just such a great review recap of digging in, making it a little bit more personal to you. And I hope you see yourself or your spouse in this information.